Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cash Flow Positive. I'm Kenny Bedwell, and I'm going to be talking with you about why I don't give a crap about macro trends in the short-term rental industry and why you shouldn't either. So let's first start with some macro trends in the short-term rental industry and then kind of take them apart and explain why they shouldn't matter to you. Okay, so first off, if we're looking at across the entire industry, we know that short-term rentals are down. In fact, in 95% of the largest vacation rental markets across the country, revenue is down by 15% or more. But average revenue, that's a key word, and we're going to hit on that one a lot. Average revenue is down in large, or just the market in general, but large vacation rental markets in particular by 15% or more. Okay, last year it was about 10. This year it's 15% or more. So the summer of this year was worse than the summer of last year by about 15% less revenue per average rental. So that's key stat number one. Now, you notice, I don't know if you caught that beginning part there, I said 95%. So it's not all. And once again, that's starting to get a little more micro instead of macro. But if we're just looking at the industry altogether, it's down. Okay. What about supply? So we know revenue is down, which is a good representation of demand, meaning what people are willing to pay, meaning they're actually staying and paying for places. So we know overall, not total revenue, but average revenue per listing is down, which must mean that supply has gone up, right? And it does naturally go up. It goes about 10,000 listings a month on average, if not more, across the country. So the total number of short-term rentals in the country has gone up by about 15%. Now, it actually would be higher, however, with local regulations starting to set in, especially in urban markets, and some places shutting markets down, like New York City. My city, Buffalo, just shut us down. And some of these other markets, we're actually seeing a slight decrease in the potential supply that would be in the market. So instead of it being 20,000, it's only 15,000. Okay. But once again, it's a macro trend. Okay. And you don't care about New York City if you're not in New York City. And that's what I want to talk about. You don't care about the Smokies if you're not in the Smokies. Okay. Or maybe you are in the Smokies and in other markets. I know some of our listeners are. But the reality is, like, every market is kind of its own unique ecosystem. It's unique, it has its own unique well-being. And even within that, there are macro trends that don't really apply to properties in those markets. Okay. So the macro trends in the STR industry are saying, look, although ADR is up because of, it naturally goes up every year because of inflation, but ADR is up, revenue is down per active rental. Occupancy is a little bit lower, about the same, but just a little slightly lower. And the number of listings has increased. In a lot of these markets, it's the average in the markets is about 10 to 12%, just kind of industry average. But there's a lot. As we've kind of learned these things and seen these things, why doesn't that matter for you? My goal in this podcast, my goal in what I do and strive to help people do is to find properties at cash flow positive, okay, in today's market, not yesterday's market, not 2021 or 2020 or pre-COVID, but today, 2024 and beyond, okay, when it's gotten a lot harder and more competitive. What that requires is finding deals, finding opportunities that have, I talk about them. I just did like a whole, last week was my episodes all by myself. And I spent a long time talking about moats and what they look like and the strategies and all that good stuff. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to those episodes. You can hear me go off and drop some really good, important information about how you can find properties in moats. But the reality is, if you have a property with a moat, you are less impacted by macro trends. And in fact, you are probably not impacted at all by the general macro trends. Okay, now I was a little soft on that, meaning like generally and overall and dependent and all this good stuff. But I'm going to say it a little more bluntly. You will not be impacted by macro trends if you have a moat. Here is why. So let's give an example. Let's say that 1,000 people last year went to a particular market. Let's say they go to Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Okay, so 1,000 people go to Broken Bow, Oklahoma. All right. everybody is, but there's 1,000 rentals and everybody is booked. Everybody's happy. Okay. So 1,000 rentals, 1,000 people, that's equilibrium. Economics are like, oh, this is it. The perfect equilibrium. And everybody's made money. Everybody's happy. Fast forward to this year. Let's say only 500 people go to Broken Bow. There's now no longer just 1,000 short-term rentals, but now there's, if we say add 15%, so that's 150. So there's 1,100 to 1,150 short-term rentals, and only 500 people are booking. Okay, so that means, let's do the math. 500 properties, individual properties, will be booked, and then the rest, like the 650 or 600, will not get a booking. All right. So we look at that, and go, oh, that's terrible. That's awful for the market. That's awful for those people who didn't get booked. But those 500 people who did get booked, they got booked. They were not impacted by the lessening of the demand trend in that particular market. Now, I know that demand is a little more variable than that. But what I'm teaching you, and the point I'm trying to make here, is that I am teaching you guys on this podcast how to be in that top 500, how to be in the top 10%, how to be in the top 5 or even the 1%. Because the truth is, if you have a moat, you will be booked. Okay, now it's not going to be 100% occupancy because it's about getting the right prices and also the right occupancy. We don't want to be 100% booked. We want to maximize our revenue by balancing occupancy and ADR correctly and during the right seasons. But the reality is, if we just lay it simply, your place will be booked even if there is a drop off in demand. Here's the macro trend. There actually is no drop off in demand. Demand is still increasing, especially with Airbnbs. Okay, so we're not seeing less and less people come to these places. We're just seeing a lot more supply in these places and people willing to pay less, and they're booking much closer to their actual stay dates. The booking lead time has dropped significantly. And so the fact of the matter is that we are looking for properties in these markets that will be booked first. That's why the macro trends are less relevant for you and more relevant for the average. Okay, there is a divide, a widening wealth gap, or what I call a revenue gap. You have the average down below. I've got my hands together like a sandwich or something, and as I spread them apart, it creates a wedge, right? So an average is down below, and then you have your top performers, your 90th percentile, those properties with the moats. They are the best of the best, the cream of the crop. They're the ones going to get booked first. And what's happening year over year to their revenue? The 90th percentile and higher, they're doing better year over year, and the average is doing worse. So it's a revenue gap. It creates a wedge between the two in terms of their performance. Okay, so we're seeing properties that are awesome do awesomer. Okay, let's make up words here. And then there's properties who are average doing worse year over year. And then those people are screaming from the hilltops, there is a bust. And we're looking at average data and we're all saying there's a bust and the market is down. But there are people still making lots of money. Okay, now that doesn't necessarily mean that over time the 90th percentile drops in overall revenue and there's no like peaks and troughs and things like that we're going to see. That's not true, but they are less impacted by macro trends. They're less impacted by demand fluctuations because they're always booked first. One of the big problems I see in this industry is investors coming from long-term rental assets, the long-term rental asset class, and pulling terminology and thought process from that into short-term rentals. When in reality, it's not the same thing whatsoever. The only commonality is they're both, like, for the most part, single-family homes or condos or units or whatever. But that's it. The type of property is the same, but how you run your pricing and operations and everything is completely different. And macro trends have a greater impact on long-term rentals whenever there are, some sort of flux in that market than short-term rentals. Why is that? And the reason why is because those properties, long-term rentals, are generically about the same in a market. You pay if you have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a particular area and it's a long-term rental, it's going to be $800 a month. Maybe $850, maybe $750, $800, like in that range. It's not going to vary that much. Same thing with the quality. It might be a little more updated than the other ones, but if it is, and maybe they get 850, and if it's not, then they get 750. But the variability is relatively low. Okay, there's low variance in what we're seeing with long-term rentals in terms of what they offer. Okay, it's the same thing. So when there is an abundance of renters, they can charge a little bit higher, but they can't charge $1,000 higher than somebody else who maybe has a slightly smaller unit. It doesn't work like that. Whereas we know in the short-term rental industry, there is a ton of variance. There's a ton of variables that impact what and how much you can charge and who you're trying to attract. And so with that variance, the types of trends saying like, oh, wow, a bunch of renters are no longer moving to this long-term rental market. Therefore, the demand has gone down and there's all this supply. Like that impacts everybody. Okay. Maybe the house that's like in the perfect location and has all the perfect things, like they get first, but everybody's on an equal playing field for the most part in a particular market. But in a short-term rental market, everyone is not on an equal playing field. We don't want to be on an equal playing field. We want to have the best property, whether it's with the best amenities, the best location, the best design decor, and so on. And those properties will always be picked first. They will always be booked first unless they're just stupidly overpriced, okay? But the reality is they will not be overpriced and there will always be demand. Therefore, a particular trend of, hey, things are down won't impact everyone equally. And that's the lesson. Understand that when you're going into a particular market and you're looking for a particular property, lesson number one, and hopefully you know this by now, don't be the average. Don't shoot for the average. I look at the numbers for the averages. It's not like I don't. And it's not, I don't look at, let me be clear on that. When I'm evaluating individual properties, I'm not evaluating based on, oh, what's the average? What's the 75th? What's the 90th percentiles? Because it doesn't work like that. Okay. It's all about understanding what's the comparables and things. But when I'm studying the market and the data in the market and the properties, what are the average attributes that everybody has? That's what I'm specifically looking for. What are those variables that everybody has where it's, that playing field? And I call that the barrier of entry. And the barrier of entry varies market to market. Okay. I think this is an older term I've referenced a lot. Maybe you've heard me say that before, barrier of entry. But in every market, it varies. And so what I encourage people to do is before they start hunting for deals in markets, they go and they study the market and what the barrier of entry is. Are all the properties there high levels of design and decor? Do they have indoor pools? Are they all cabins? Are they all waterfront? Do they all have barrel saunas and hot tubs and pickleball courts and whatever? Like, what is that barrier of entry? Because every single market is different. Let me give you an example. My Watkins Glen property that I reference all the freaking time. I mean, it's just a class example of this. Like people, some of the homes are updated, but nobody had a hot tub. Okay. And I'm just like, well, great. The barrier of entry is no hot tub. So I don't need a hot tub. I didn't actually get a hot tub until my second year. And that's really where it started to blow up in terms of revenue potential. But understanding that that's a really low barrier of entry, whereas most lake markets, they all have hot tubs that. You have to have that to launch. You can't just sacrifice that or say I'll put that down the road, when in reality the barrier of entry is at X. So don't be at Y, meaning below that barrier of entry. Now that you know what the barrier of entry is, then you have to get creative and go, well, what is my moat? Because your barrier of entry is not your moat, right? It's the average. So figure out your barrier of entry and then determine what your moat is and build your property, or not necessarily, not saying build, but whatever it could be. We talked about this last time: location, quality, design decor, or amenities are your 4 moat categories. Whether you're adding those things and combining those and stacking, remember we talked about stacking those together as well. Doing those things will help you figure out what is going to push you into the higher performance level for that particular market, as well as listening to all the other good advice and things I've shared in the great guests. We've had some awesome guests and awesome conversations recently, or just in general. I think they've all been really good. And hopefully I can keep that quality up for you guys. And so the lesson here is, when you hear bad news especially about short-term rentals, they're not going to go away. Okay. And it's not something that's just going to get banned from, the state or the government level, especially in, maybe more conservative states or in vacation markets where it's more traditional, right? So it's not going to go away. And the data says that revenue can still go up even when the average is down. So why are we concerned about macro trends? Just food for thought. I'm going to wrap this episode up. In the next episode, I bring in somebody who invests in highly saturated markets, and he has different types of plays that he does in different markets. And he's going to talk about these things, and he's going to talk about why you don't necessarily need to do what everyone else is doing, whatever the trends are in the market. Why, if everyone is, it's basically a whole conversation on when everyone zigs, you zag, and what that means for you. And so I really want you to listen to that one. This guy is really good on mindset and helping people overcome. And he's got a very successful short-term rental portfolio. And so I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And by the way, before I wrap up here, I do want to mention, if you guys could leave me a 5-star review. I love actually reading the reviews. I started to get some and I'm like, oh, cool. Like, thank you. And like getting the good advice and like what you love about the podcast. That's what I love to see in the review. So leave me a review. 5-star would be great. But more importantly, tell me what you like about the podcast and review, and I will read it and I appreciate it. Thank you for those who've already left reviews. And my name is Kenneth Bedwell, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cash Flow Positive.